Hello and welcome back to the Poultry Network podcast. I'm Tom Woolman.
And I'm Tom Willings.
Hello, Tom.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm all right. Yeah. Autumn is definitely with us, isn't it?
It's freezing cold. I've got my poppy on, but I've also got about 15 layers on because I'm too tight to stick the heating on. Yeah,
You might have to do a few star jumps maybe in the middle of the recording
exactly.
if you feel like you're losing the sensation in your toes.
Exactly. First thing I'm going to do is shut my pop holes. Have you shut your pop holes ready for tonight, midnight tonight?
Well, I haven't shut my pop holes because at the moment I've just looked and I'm not in an area where I'm required to. But actually, tomorrow I could be in an area where I am required to, and it's a little bit confusing. This housing order, exactly why they've picked the area that they have, doesn't really seem to make a lot of sense to me.
I too am outside of this regional mandatory housing order that comes into effect from the 30th of October and encompasses all of the northern England and much of Midlands, East Anglia, but for a strange reason excludes all of Wales and all of the southern counties of England, and of course Scotland and Northern Ireland as well. But there's a reported case from earlier in only the start of this season, really not very far away from me, and yet we're apparently deemed insufficiently at risk to warrant a housing order. I'm not sure that the wild birds have got the message.
No, and when I look at the spread on the map, I would say that the spread has been fairly consistent between east and west. Yes, there's been some cases further north, maybe a few more further north than there have further south, but it looks like there's an impact across the country. I think it's particularly interesting for Wales because there's a lot of free-range producers in Wales that will be very worried at the moment, and you get into this funny situation where Welsh Animal Health decides to go in a different direction to English Animal Health, and Scotland has obviously got to do their own thing as well.
I think everyone's would be really worried and very naturally worried. Why would they not be concerned about it? And let's remember, this is very early in the season. We're still at the back end of October, and I'd say historically, I don't mean of old, but you go back over the course of the last 5 years, October, with the exception of I think it was 22-23, has been very, very quiet indeed. And then it's November that we start to see the case numbers start to ramp up. Our housing order, or those that are involved in a housing order now, has come ahead of time from the previous year. But the previous year there were no cases in October, so that feels proportionate. But when the powers that be, the authorities, the scientists themselves are pointing to just how great they perceive the risk to be relative to immediately prior years, it seems really strange that there isn't a more coordinated approach, firstly across the whole of England, but secondly across the whole of the United Kingdom. You'd have thought they'd be aligned on this one when people like Gordon Hickman, OBE, are saying we're bracing ourselves for a very difficult season ahead.
Yeah, you would have thought it would all be mapped out really, and and as the cases arose, as and when they arose in certain places, that they would just act as one, wouldn't you?
Well, there's been a rash in the last week, hasn't there? It hasn't really been very much momentum around the talk, or at least the talk that has become audible to public ears such as yours or mine in the past week. But just prior to and then over the weekend that's just gone, there's been a rash of new cases, new breaks, and then to the credit of all of those people that are involved in making these decisions, what appears to be on the face of it a relatively decisive intervention to put a housing order in place. But again, without wanting to sound overly critical, it's just very strange that the region has been defined in the way that it has, and let's see what the month of November brings. For the extension of the housing order, but I hope this is not the case. I hope it's completely wrong. But the further spread is the disease, which feels somewhat inevitable.
Yeah, I mean, if I were going to sum it up, when I looked at the map, it almost looks like my 5-year-old has drawn on the map of the UK with a red crayon, and they've just gone where they want to. There doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it.
I think you need to get off the fence, Tom, and say what you really think. Scathing. I'll tell you what is interesting. I think what is interesting is what it's going to do to the market, because there's been, for the last few months, there's been a degree of, if not expectation, then nervous talk about the potential for the egg market to be recover its balance between supply and demand, and perhaps there will be sufficient eggs. You've seen plenty of new planning permissions, and the national flock continue to grow. And there are only two things that are going to stop that inevitable imbalance or oversupply, and of course one of them is disease. The other is a growth in demand. And yeah, it feels almost overnight there is another change in tone, because it's not just our country that are suffering with losses. The Netherlands, I think, have culled something in the region of 250,000 birds in, and not saying they're all layers, but there's been significant losses in the Netherlands. I read a report this week that Germany have culled 400,000 birds, and markets there are pretty tight, and
it's probably about 500,000 layers, isn't it, that we've lost?
Well, it's got to be. It was 300,000 barn at a stroke
in the past month, yeah.
And I would imagine that it's well over 200,000 in the last few days alone. So yeah, it's going to be more than 500,000 gone.
And interestingly, at the moment, it's a lot of the losses this month have been egg layers, haven't they? Barn layers and free range.
Yes.
And I'm sure there's a lot of people on the broiler breeding side and the turkey side holding their breath, really. I know this is a really quite a nervous time for turkey producers, really.
Yeah. A lot of sunk cost in turkey production right now. Give it another. They've got to get through another month, haven't they? Until the turkey cull is fully underway for Christmas for those fresh birds, obviously. But an awful lot of money invested to that point.
I was going to ask Tom, when we're talking about supply and constraints on supply, when it comes to eggs, there's also some other things in the offing that we've become aware of around seconds and how seconds are graded that might impact the number of seconds which are coming out of the packers' processes.
Yeah, we should tell our audience that we had invited Gary Ford from Free Range Egg Producers Association to join us on today's call, and he's had some internet problems, but he's more genned up on this than I am. But I can tell you from kind of personal experience, working with a few in the industry and in and out of a couple of packing centres in the course of the last few weeks, that this is a genuine live discussion point and pressure point in the trade. I think what's happened. This is my interpretation as well, so I should say sort of kind of without prejudice and all of that carry on. But I think this is a reaction from APHA to the subjectivity that really exists in the classification of second grade eggs. So there's been some pretty well publicised challenges, i.e. legal challenges, cases around what constitutes Class A and Class B eggs, and I think a conclusion could be drawn that says the guidelines, which I think, if I'm right in saying, and it's Gary that told me this, that the guidelines are best part of 25 years old, 20 years old at least. And the kind of the categorization of faults. So by faults, I'm talking about, cracks and specifically in this case, different types of dirt, of surface marking on the egg. So that could
it's
be
sort of dust, isn't it? And
dust is definitely one, and that's it's a massively contentious one. Is dust, as is albumin. Your nail hit firmly on the head, but it could be, it could be soiling from feces. It could be blood. It could be signs of pest or parasite or whatever it might be. But to your point, albumin and dust are two things that I think the industry has got on notice. You've got to watch this very carefully, because the process of grading eggs is continuous, and the machine is a wonderfully complicated piece of kind of meccano, if you like, but moving in harmony, in symphony, all of these moving parts, which if they didn't work in perfect synchronization would result in enormous numbers of eggs just being smashed to bits on the machine itself. So they are continuous, but inevitably an egg breaks, and as it breaks, if it breaks, then it's going to leak, and when it leaks, it's going to contaminate the eggs that then immediately follow in that process. And not just one or two, but there is a legacy to a broken egg, which can kind of give an egg that you might find in the supermarket today in the box, a ring of kind of glazing of where that albumin has, contaminated, I suppose, for want of a better word, eggs that have followed in the process. To avoid that is a very, very difficult thing. I'd say it's an impossible ask. And to downgrade all of those eggs that are just glazed, is the word. Equally, I think, I don't know how many eggs would end up being rejected, but I would suggest that they would be significant. Dust is a slightly different one, because that obviously is dust. I say obviously, the chances are it is dust that originates from the farm, and then the farm has definitely got a role to play in removing that dust, or seeing that dust doesn't become problematic. Whereas you'd argue, well, certainly I would if I were a producer in the case of the albumin, that, well, if the eggs are collected from my farm and they're A-OK, and you've, as a packer or my customer, you've signed for them to say that you're happy with them. The fact that when they've got to the machine, there's been a problem with them and that they've been downgraded, is that really my liability? And I think this is the point. There's a huge debate that's could come down the tracks if what is being rumoured or suspected at a packing centre level comes to pass, between the producer of and the packer that's handling those eggs, as to where the fault originated and who carries the cost. And ultimately, there's then another discussion about what effect does that have on the market? Well, I can think of two immediately blindingly obvious ones. One, there's going to be less eggs. And the consequences of that is going to be, inflationary on price. Many farmers might say that's a brilliant thing, bring it on. But it could be inflationary for the consumer. That's probably not a great thing for demand. And ultimately, if all of these standards are part of the national control program for the protection against salmonella specifically. One's got to look at the UK's salmonella record and say it's as good as, if not better than, anybody else's. And to that point, if you're going to reduce the net output of the UK of Class A eggs fit to be sold to the consumer, you're then going to open the door to something that is inevitably going to be of an inferior quality or health status. So how do you square that circle?
That's what you're saying. If you create a shortage in the market, then the likelihood of eggs coming in from other countries whose salmonella records are not as strong increases dramatically. Yeah.
Completely. We're a net importer anyway. I think 70% of the eggs produced in this country will end up being sold directly on the supermarket shelf. So, we are as a nation somewhere between 80 and 90% self-sufficient. We're a net importer all of the time, and some of what we are producing does go into processing, i.e., heat treatment, pasteurization, cooking, etc. So there is capacity for some of what's being produced to go into processing, but it remains to be seen how many eggs would ultimately be implicated in the recategorization. But Tom, let me give you a couple of stats. The original guidance notes has in the region of 30, 35 photographs that depict the quality of eggs, of which only four refer to inferior quality and external faults. I think the draft new guidelines, which I think the industry has got until something like the 7th of November to report back on, to potentially push back on. I don't think you'd call that a consultation, but there's an internal discussion going on. But I think the new guidelines have got maybe 25 or even 30 pictures of faulty or external faults in eggs, and 100 photos that depict eggs as a whole. So,
but how does it work?
Difference.
Forgive my ignorance, but I'm not up to speed with how eggs are graded in packing centres with commercial eggs. But are these gradings are being done by computer? Though they're not being done by person, are they?
No, goodness me, no. This is, you talk about machines that are capable of handling 250,000 eggs an hour. And
so how would the standard then, when we've changed the standard and you say we've got more pictures with what is classed as a downgrade, how would you input that then into the grading computer, and it would make adjustments accordingly, would it?
Well, I think the grading computers are set up by the operator. So I think there's the first point to say is that your grader and my grader may not operate to exactly the same standards, because there's a human intervention there that sets what is a tolerance or an acceptable tolerance to have the
it's a bit like rejects in a broiler processing factory, where in theory everyone's grading to the same standards, but different factories will come out with slightly different levels depending on just how they operate and who's actually in charge of the process.
I shouldn't make that sound as vague as perhaps I did in my answer, but ultimately there are egg marketing regulations that determine that at the point that the eggs leave the egg packing centre, there is a tolerance for faults in those eggs, and those faults are both internal and external, that then APHA come and spot check, without notice, and to whatever extent that they determine to be proportionate. So, if they find nothing in half an hour, I expect they go home. But if they find something, then they'll look a bit deeper, and they'll look a bit deeper, etc. And that tolerance level is set, and the packers, of course, will look to tread a fair line. That means that they're always on the right side, but they don't want to be, they're a commercial organisation, and if they've got a tolerance, then they'll work to those tolerances. Fair enough. But those tolerances, that's where the subjectivity comes in, because the inspectors are applying the rules. I don't think the rules per se are changing. An egg glazed with albumin would be deemed to be, by the letter of the rules, to be a Class B. But to what extent does glazing constitute glazing? These are the areas that are more vague. And again, you go back. My point is, you go back to the supermarket shelf today, and you open any box, and there's a pretty fair chance that within that carton, even on a 6-pack, you're likely to find an egg that has some marking from that exact issue, where an egg, goodness knows how many eggs before on the machine, has broken and left a trace of leaking albumin. Does it make that egg dirty or unsafe? Well, absolutely not. Here we are. We're the safest place to eat eggs in the world. Who knows? But
And welcome Jeremy Clarkson to the Poultry Network podcast.
Someone once said I sound like Charlie off Clarkson's farm, which I take as an enormous compliment. I think that's a great thing to be off of Clarkson's farm, but perhaps not Clarkson himself.
Yes, no, and my wife, when she used to try and explain to people what I did for a living, she used to describe me as cheerful Charlie for chicken farmers. Turn up and have a look at what's going on and try and bring a little bit of reality to the situation that's going on. But I think it also comes back to the fact that I'm quite clearly a bold chap going to farms and delivering advice, and the same is true of you as well.
Absolutely right. Well, Tom, that sounds like a pretty good place to end it for this week. It's an interesting time ahead, both from an egg quality point of view and an avian flu point of view. So, catch up with you next week.
Yeah,
and,
I'm sure
let's see what
things
will
move pretty quickly, won't they, when it comes to the avian flu situation? So, one to keep a close eye on.